This is the most common circle in OS. It lies at the coordinates 256192 and it appears in about 32% of all maps that were ranked before June 2021. If you were to take every single circle placed here and put them in a single map 1 millisecond apart, it would look like this for over 2 minutes. I got this information by getting the data dump of all ranked and loved maps and shoving it into a database. When we look at the raw data, there wasn't even a contest as to what coordinate would be the most used. You're almost 7.5 times more likely to find a circle at this position than in the next most common position. Some of the more observant of you will notice that this coordinate is at the exact centre of the playfield, but then, when you think about it, although it's interesting, that's not actually too surprising. One reason for this is that most songs have some sort of climax, and most mappers will want to create some memorable pattern to make that climax stand out, and well, much like in photography or at the theatre, the obvious position to place your subject to make it stand out is at the centre. If we look at the next most common objects, this also seems to be holding true. In fact, the top 33 most commonly used coordinates are all found at x256, which is the centre vertical line of the playfield. In terms of which maps use the centre line, almost a whopping 94% of all ranked maps have an object placed along this line. 94%. Despite countless mapping styles and techniques that have evolved over the years, most maps still seem to have these sorts of things in common. And yeah, even though I said the centre is a good place to have something stand out, not every object placed here will be for that purpose. But still, I think that's interesting. Just out of curiosity, I also looked for the most common objects taking into account the time, and there were 2 candidates for the most common in this case, both at 9 hits each, so it doesn't really take much to get the record here. Both of these circles are at the centre of the playfield, no surprises there, but the times they appear are wildly different. The first set are at 3834 milliseconds, right at the start, and appears in only 2 map sets, with both mappers applying the same style of intro to their map. The second time is a bit more surprising, appearing at 248234 milliseconds, or 4 minutes and 8 seconds into the map. This circle appears in only 1 map set, Blue Zenith hosted by Asphyxia, and it's the final circle of the map before the final spinner. Despite the map set having several guest mappers, all difficulties have this same centre circle into the final spinner. Whether each mapper did that on their own accord or if it was the host's decision, I don't really know. Looking at the other end of the spectrum, for the least used coordinates, this was a little trickier. Normally, the playfield grid is 512 units across by 384 units high. However, by editing the .osu file, you're able to place objects below Y384, and they'll be loaded into the game as you would expect. This is in fact rankable, as long as the object doesn't actually get rendered off screen, even though you're not really supposed to do this. Another caveat found in some older maps is having objects placed outside of the 512 by 512 area, such as this object, which is placed in the file at -8x. I'm not really too sure how these worked in older versions of the game, but these days the game will just push these to where x equals 0 would be. Something similar also happens if you try to use a non-integer coordinate. The game will just snap the object to the closest whole number position. So, let's just simplify things. In the standard 512 by 384 grid, there are 197,505 possible coordinates to place an object. Which one is the least used? It turns out that every single coordinate has been used in a ranked map at least twice. There are 3 coordinates where there are only 2 objects that have ever existed, and here they are. You may have noticed that these are right by the corners. Again, pretty expected. But consider this. We had 80,274 ranked maps before June 2021, and out of all of them, only 2 people have ever thought to place an object at the coordinates 12, 1, and then try to rank it. We can take this further by considering the type of object being used, and we can find coordinates where no one has ever placed a specific type of object in and gotten them mapped ranked. There are 5 coordinates where no one has ever placed a circle, which are shown here, and there are 3 for sliders, shown here. Which means that if you've ever made a map and you've placed a circle at exactly 12, 1 on the grid, your map is, statistically, not rankable. Next interesting fact. If we group each object into quadrants on the playfield, it turns out that the bottom left is the most common quadrant to place objects, but only just. In fact, each of the quadrants are pretty well balanced in terms of object count. I've also made a heat map of where objects are most likely to appear, but honestly, it turned out to be pretty uninteresting. Like, it's pretty much what you'd expect. Though, then again, the fact that it's uninteresting could be interesting in and of itself. Alright, now let's look at where people like to place the first object in a map. Ignoring spinners because, well, spinners are boring. Once again, objects in the dead centre have a clear lead. Surprise, surprise. Let's try grouping things into quadrants again, and... oh. Now that is interesting. The top left quadrant is way more popular than the other three for starting a map. 46% of all maps even, nearly half of all maps. And there's probably a pretty simple reason too. If you take out your pen and start, say, writing a letter to someone, most of you will be starting at the top left of the paper. It seems this style of starting in the top left has also translated into mapping, even though there's really nothing stopping the mapper from starting anywhere else. If we make another heat map, you can see this influence pretty clearly. There's a nice bright spot towards the top left of the playfield. However, it's a lot less popular around the very edges because, well, if you were to start writing at the very edge of the paper, it just seems wrong, if you know what I mean. That's pretty much it for interesting things I've found so far. There's a link in the description to my code if you want to build your own database to play around with. It's not the cleanest code in the world, but it works. Special shout out to TF and L1,106,188 for using a different encoding on their maps for whatever reason. My code really appreciated that, so thanks. Please let me know any other interesting facts you find with this. I like interesting facts.